Welcome to Love Bite.
I was 17 years old when Harry Sullivan proposed that we kill Esme. And it was on our joint wedding day, 8 years later, my hands slick with my wife's blood, when his words finally hit me. There was a drilling sound in my head. Sometimes it was loud. Other times it was faint, barely noticeable. But it was definitely there, getting closer and closer. Louder. I should have known not inviting Esme Lockhart to our party was a bad idea, but I was too tipsy to care. In my muddled mind, I would deal with the consequences later. Sitting on the beach with my knees pulled to my chest and a cool beer skimming my lips, I watched the tide ripple under my toes. The wind was trying to snatch the bottle from my hand, blowing my hair from my eyes. Behind me, the party was in full swing and Esme was being weird again. Even through sharp blasts of wind trying to knock me over, I could hear her attempting to guilt-trip Wylan for talking to a girl. It's not like I didn't expect it. Wylan had told me about the weird notes in his locker and the low-key threats in his mailbox to not even think about leaving for college. I just didn't want to believe our best friend was this obsessed with us. If I'm honest, though, Esme was a long-standing obsession. Infatuation. This girl was a fucking psychopath. Downing my beer, I reveled in the scratchy taste. I didn't even like it. But it was better than drinking straight vodka, which made you a psychopath. Still, though, the alcohol was perfect to lower my barriers and force words out of my mouth that I had been choking on for years. I like to think the stars aligned when we were little kids and fate found us. 5-7-year-olds with our hands on the last candy bar. Pigtails, for eyes, Batman shirt, rich girl, and yellow hat. Initially, we fought for it. I snatched the candy bar up first, claiming finders keepers, only for Pigtails to grab it off of me, waving it in the air triumphantly, and only for Four Eyes and Batman's shirt to form an allegiance, taking it for themselves. I shoved on a Batman shirt and he, in turn, pulled off my hat and made me cry. Rich Girl, who had been wandering around, stepped in. We already knew who Rich Girl was. Her parents made more money than the Queen. At least, that's what the rumor was in class. Rich Girl was rich, which meant she was either a celebrity or a long-lost princess. In reality, her father, Jason Song, had bought our little coastal town. The rich girl plucked the candy bar from the boys and initiated a truce, splitting it 4 ways instead. I did try to argue that I saw it first, but the girl insisted on us sharing. It was when she was handing out chunks of chocolate that we shared our names, grinning at each other with chocolatey mouths. Pigtails was Ariosa. For eyes, Harry. The Batman shirt was by Wylan. Rich Girl, Esme. And Yellow Hat was me. The rest was history, I guess. Following that day, the 5 of us became inseparable. In school, we became an unbreakable clique. As littles, we made our own games and spent countless hours at the beach on weekends playing pirates. It was fun. Those summer days and nights will be etched into my mind forever, a blur of swimming in the sea, eating candy, and sharing stories under a late-setting sun. Esme would regularly invite us to play at her house, which reminded me of a palace. She had 7 bathrooms. Who needed 7 bathrooms? As little ones, we made a pact. On the last day of summer vacation before 3rd grade, we declared best friends forever. Then, when we were 12, tipsy on Esme's father's expensive wine and spread out on a picnic blanket, we said it again, giggling under a crescent moon. Best friends forever. It was when we reached high school that Esme started to take our pact a little too seriously. I loved her as much as I loved the others. But she didn't know boundaries. Best friends forever was something a lot different in her mind. It started subtly. When other kids wanted to hang out with us, she was adamant that it was just the 5 of us. We were 14 years old and in our freshman year of high school. Making new friends was inevitable. I invited 2 girls to sit with us at lunch and Esme immediately stood up, dragging the boys and Ariosa to another table. When I stood my ground and plunked down, refusing to follow them, Esme came over and politely asked me to join her and the others. By now, I was getting odd looks from other kids. Esme Song was a well-known name across town, and so was my name by default. I was already in way too deep with her family to brush her off. Esme's father had already insisted on paying for my college tuition. I said no initially, though my mother thought it was a great idea. Esme had a habit of throwing cash at us when she thought we were going to leave her. Harry was promised a football scholarship when he showed signs of drifting away to hang out with the varsity team. When Wylan got a girlfriend, Esme surprised him with the guitar he had been saving up for. Ariosa started getting cozy with a classmate, and that classmate's parents suddenly won a lottery I had never heard of and moved away. Initially, she isolated us from other kids, even our family, insisting on weekends away and trips to exotic locations. But we were growing up and best friends forever were looking progressively less likely. Esme thought our pact was an unbreakable bond, a need to be near each other constantly and be completely isolated from everyone else. Esme thought best friends forever meant we couldn't fall in love and couldn't form relationships. She didn't want us to grow up. In junior year, Harry actually went against her wishes and got a boyfriend. Harry Sullivan liked to experiment behind Esme's back, having been on several dates with both guys and girls. It was well known that he was a player. Even if Esme shot down those rumors, I think he truly fell for Ben. Opposites attract, and Harry, captain of the varsity team, falling for Ben Sykes, a quiet competitive swimmer, was the best thing that had happened to our group. Harry was slowly rebelling, which gave us the courage to fly the nest too. Initially, Esme didn't react or say anything. In fact, she smiled when Harry awkwardly introduced us, his gaze glued to Esme. He was waiting for her to start screaming, his eyes hard and lips ready to argue. But she didn't. Esme offered Ben a seat. Wylan shot me a look and Ariosa almost choked on her sandwich. Harry didn't let his guard down though. He politely declined her offer and joined the varsity table instead. Harry Sullivan was slowly but surely moving away from us, away from our best friends forever, and away from our stupid childhood pact. He wanted his own life and his own friends. Ben was the start of that. Again, I was sure Esme was planning something. She forced Wylan's friends to move schools and ripped Ariosa's boyfriend out of town, so it didn't make sense to me why she was letting Harry get away with it. She even restricted us from talking to adults unless it was our parents. Harry could have limited conversation with his coach only in school time, and Wylan was only able to join the drama club if he promised to let the rest of us sit in the audience. If that wasn't weird enough, we were permitted to tell her everything. Every secret we had or worry on our minds. Obviously, we didn't. There was no way I was telling her about my late first period, and I was pretty sure the boys would rather die than share their private lives. Sometimes we didn't have a choice. Esme would lock us in her car and demand every private detail, and it was less exhausting to just spill our guts. I made the mistake of talking to a girl, Emma, at the start of the year. Esme may not have been in all of my classes, but she had spies, kids that were paid a decent sum of cash to make sure none of her friends were socializing. Emma switched classes a day later, and when I tracked her down in the hallway, her eyes widened like she was frightened. Emma told me to stay away from her, so I did. I didn't have a fucking choice. I should have known the boy watching us gush over TV show crushes was loyal to Esme. I thought she was okay with Harry dating someone. I mean, she didn't throw a screaming fit like usual. Which was progress. I was surprised she was actually allowing someone into the group. Esme seemed genuinely happy with Harry's boyfriend joining our group, allowing him to come to hang out at her house and our usual place on the beach. The holidays came around and Ariosa proposed a Christmas party at her place. I was 2 hours late after a heated argument with Mom over the car. When I arrived, I immediately knew something was wrong. There was no music and the lights were off. I did see an attempt at a party, grabbing myself some holiday-themed punch from the lounge. The figure sitting alone in the kitchen caught me off guard. It was pitch black, so I thought it was the ghost of Christmas past after Esme forced us to watch Christmas movies with her a few days prior. When I clicked on the light, however, an identity swam into view. Ben. Judging from the cans scattered on the table, he was maybe 5 or 6 drinks down. Harry's boyfriend regarded me with an almost pitiful smile. Hey, Thea. His voice was a kind of croak. Ben held up his can in a mocking salute. Merry Christmas. Hey. I poured him a glass of water, sitting down hesitantly, my hands wrapped around a glass of punch. Is everything okay? Oh yeah, I'm great. Ben's sarcasm needed work. Harry was a master of irony, so maybe he was rubbing off on him. Ben downed another beer. I missed a swim meet to come to this stupid party. Ouch. Technically, it was an Esme-centered party, so we were all there against our will. I nodded, sipping my punch. It was kind of spicy. So, where's everyone else? Ben met my gaze, his lips curling. Where do you think? I shrugged. I dunno. Did they go out? I think Ben was waiting for me to give him a reason to find Harry. I couldn't give him one without going against the Song family and putting myself in danger. The boy scoffed. Whatever, Thea, he said, standing up. Tell that bastard I never want to see him again, he mumbled, staggering out of the kitchen. Ben stopped in the doorway, but he didn't turn around. You guys deserve each other, he laughed, and something ice-cold prickled its way down my spine. I didn't even wait for Ben to leave, and by the sound of it, he was already emptying his guts in the front hallway. Ignoring him, I forced my legs upstairs, my heart hammering. There was no way, right? Because if Esme had done this, then she would have won. The girl had a perfectly calculated plan after all. Esme didn't want Harry to be intimate with anyone else but her. I realized that when I stumbled into a lot of tangled legs and flushed faces under blankets. Wylan told me to turn off the light, but I was too stunned to move. This wasn't what I expected. Esme wanted us to be friends. But this was different. This was closer and more intimate, where she could have every part of us, body, mind, and soul. The logical side of my brain wondered if she had become so scared that we would find love and ruin our friendship pact that she immediately wanted us to love her instead. While the not-so-alert part of my brain wanted to entangle myself in their weird foursome sandwich. So I joined them. I mean, it was cold, the punch was definitely filled with aphrodisiacs to influence guests, and seeing Harry buried under Esme, his legs tangled around Ariosa, I'd say Esme's plan had succeeded. I didn't want to know what Ben saw. Later on, I discovered that he walked in on them and Harry, fully bewitched by Esme's spell, ignored him. Ben was right. We did deserve each other. Esme had made sure of that. I was feeling a little more than heated, so yeah, I crawled into bed with them. I wanted to believe it meant something. Even if I knew deep down, Esme was tightening her iron grip. Ever since that night, our relationship has become more intimate, which has brought us closer together. But we never actually dated. Esme didn't want to date us, she just didn't want anyone else to date us. Most of my junior and senior year was a blur of blindly following orders and watching the light slowly start to fizzle out in my friends' eyes. Esme demanded we move in with her, though luckily our parents stepped in. When she started talking about friendship and marriage, I think that was when we decided that we were done. Best friends forever would never continue into college. I was sure of it. Harry was the first to get a football scholarship. Halfway across the country. Esme did what she always did. She smiled through gritted teeth, congratulating him with a hug. I caught Wylan's oh fuck look, pretending to choke on his drink. We already knew she was planning something potentially life-destroying. We took bets. Wylan was convinced her father would buy the college itself. Ariosa went down a darker route, saying Esme would burn the campus to the ground. Esme did neither, attempting manipulation more directly. In the days following his announcement, Harry had received 3 anonymous death threats and a stuffed rabbit filled with pig's blood thrown in his locker. When he talked to his parents, they went straight to the police, only to drop the case several hours later after a talk with Jason Song. Harry said it was like his parents had been hypnotized. Esme turned the whole town against us, so we had no choice but to run back to her. Wylan talked to a girl during gym, and one of Esme's spies immediately reported it. I accidentally smiled at Josh Peak in AP English and received a strongly worded email to not even look at him. Senior year drew to a close, and our only solace was a stupid party on the beach. I made sure to only invite kids who either hated Esme or had offered us their help in the past. They were too scared to turn up. Emily Littlewood said her family could get us fake IDs and get us out of town. She sent Ariosa a text from an unknown number only disclosing her name in cryptic code. Emily's parents were in a car crash hours later. Anyone who tried to help us was either hurt or cut out of the picture. We were officially on our own. Presently, I feel sick to my stomach. I got an email from a college I didn't even apply to congratulating me on my acceptance. The college just so happened to be the one Wylan and Ariosa were accepted into, and of course, Harry was going there too. The letter was stuffed in my pocket and I was planning on burning it. It was my way of breaking the stupid pact. We were not going to be best friends forever because in Esme's eyes, she didn't see the 4 of us as friends. Esme saw us as trophies. Pretty things she could call hers. Fuck that. We built a fire on the beach. Harry pulled out his acceptance letter first, and in our own private ceremony, we took turns throwing them into the flames. I wanted to laugh in relief, but I was too scared to laugh, too scared to smile, constantly looking over my shoulder to see if we were being watched. I started to let my guard down, slumping on the sand to eat charred marshmallows and talk shit when Esme herself turned up with a crate of beers. Wylan shot me a death glare because I was usually the one who accidentally exposed our location. But I had been so careful. Ariosa immediately stiffened up and Harry rolled his eyes, draining the rest of his beer. I think he was expecting it. We had all mutually agreed that Esme and her family were witches. Ariosa's expression twisted with genuine fright and she panicked, plucking the smoldered remains of our letters from the fire and stuffing them in her backpack. I was sure she burned herself from the way she kept wafting her hand, wrapping her fingers around an icy beer, though she was more scared of getting caught trashing Esme's gift. Luckily, Esme didn't notice, excusing herself for being late. Harry was uncharacteristically snappy, leaning forward in his chair. The boy wasn't even trying to hide his disdain for her. 2 days before, he broke down in my car. It was the only place without a camera and without spies hanging around. Wylan was sleeping in the back and Ariosa was dozing in his lap. Harry kept it together until I asked him if he was okay, and his body kind of jerked, like he was trembling. He had spent the whole car ride staring into oblivion, his eyes half closed and his lips curled into an almost maniacal smile. I didn't notice he was clinging onto his seat for dear life, like Esme was going to pop up out of nowhere. I can't do this anymore. He kept saying it again and again and again until his fingers were clawing at his hair and he was screaming, his eyes almost feral like a wild animal. I can't fucking do this anymore, she's going to kill me. I hugged him. It was all I could do. Just a few more weeks, I told him. Then we would be free. How did you know we were here? Harry's eyes narrowed, his lips curling. Are you stalking us, Esme? His tone was like warm water washing over me. I thought it might finally push her away. Esme shot him a grin. I always know where you are, she said, ruffling his hair. I was just making last-minute arrangements for something special. Harry wasn't playing around, scoffing through another mouthful of beer. And what's that? He mumbled under his breath. Another death threat? Esme seemed to notice his disobedience, though she didn't say anything, maintaining her wide smile. That's a secret. Harry sat back in his chair, nursing another beer. Wylan nudged him to stop drinking, but he protested with a groan, slurping from the can. I'm sick of being ordered around, he said, downing another beer, as if in protest. I'm going to do whatever I fucking want. His half-lidded gaze fell on Esme, who had visibly stiffened up. You do whatever the fuck you want, and I'll do whatever the fuck I want, he said, saluting her with his drink. All right? When Esme didn't respond, Harry threw his empty can at her. The girl didn't even flinch. I'm going to Duke, you psycho sponge. Harry spat, and I caught Wylan's wry smile. Ariosa's expression brightened. Duke was always his first choice. I don't want to go to your fucking college, Esme. I don't want to be anywhere near you or your family. You're a leech. You leech on people and suck the life out of them and then throw money at them when they want to leave. What you're doing is borderline psycho. You take everything away from us. When we find friends, you make them disappear, and when we find someone, you throw yourself at us. Like a leech? Gulping down beer, he was just getting started. That night with Ben, Harry choked out. You fucked with their heads. He spluttered on a sob, and Ari moved to grab his hand, but he shoved her away, his lips curling into a snarl, angrily swiping at his eyes. No, get off of me, it needs to be said. His gaze flicked back to Esme. You turned my parents into mindless followers of yours so you could keep me under your control. You manipulate us with money, vacations, and fancy scholarships. I mean, who fucking does that, huh? What kind of person goes to these kinds of lengths to keep friends? He laughed. You threaten and isolate us and seriously think we want to be friends? Harry let out a shuddery breath. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to leave me and my parents alone. The same goes for Ari, Thea, and Wylan. You're going to get your father to fire my parents, and then you're going to get your connections you keep bragging about to cancel the scholarship I don't even want. If you don't, I'll happily contact the police and get your ass thrown in jail for stalking. His smile was harsh, almost manic, when Esme opened her mouth. Harry tipped his head back, dazedly blinking at the sky. Not the police under your dad's thumb, he said with a snort. I'm not fucking stupid. I mean outside of town where you'll face actual consequences. His eyes darkened. After tonight, I don't want to see your face again. His words were venomous, and I reveled in each one. Find new friends in college, Esme, and pray that they tolerate your psycho bullshit. Harry's voice faded out, the sea suddenly became so much louder in my ears, waves crashing onto the sand before drifting back. And don't put you 6 feet under the fucking ground. Esme seemed frozen for a moment, and we all waited with bated breath. Was this it? Would she finally leave us alone? Instead of replying, the girl turned her attention away from Harry and plunked herself down on Ariosa's lap, chastising Wylan for wearing a short-sleeved shirt. Esme insisted on styling us like dolls. She hated when Ariosa tied up her hair, and I wasn't allowed to straighten my curls. Harry had to wear contact lenses. If he wore glasses, she ignored him for days. When he lost his contacts and had to wear glasses, Esme bought him unlimited contacts. Harry didn't respond to Esme ignoring him, instead cracking open another beer. He shot me a grin, which was a little too wide. Jesus fucking Christ, I remember thinking. He was losing his mind. Mission accomplished. If drunk Harry thought it was a mission accomplished, sober Harry was in for a rude awakening. The girl's lack of response wasn't a win. It was a time bomb. Esme started talking about her own college acceptance letter, and I caught him glaring at her, his fingers pulverizing the can. I hated what she was in the process of turning him into. Wylan was staying quiet, absently making a mini sand castle, and Ariosa was snoozing on the sand. The party was primarily to plan a quiet escape, and once again, Esme had made it about her. I excused myself, escaping down to the shallows. The silence was a relief. I dropped onto my buttocks, letting the tide wash over my feet. Sticking my toes in bioluminescent plankton, I wondered how a candy bar had single-handedly ruined my life. Esme was making a fool of herself again. In the corner of my eye, she was standing with her hands on her hips, her blonde curls being whipped around in the wind. Wylan had done something wrong. I had no idea what it was, though from the sound of her voice, it sounded like he'd been hiding a friend. It was when I was watching the sea wash up on the sand that I heard it again. Drilling. It felt close, but also far away. We could just kill her, you know. Harry was standing behind me, swaying slightly with a fresh drink in his hand. He looked like a ghost under a moonlit sky. His cheeks were too pale and dark brown hair was glued to his forehead with sweat. He wasn't smiling. Esme said it was his best attribute, so he made sure to never smile around her. I took a moment to drink in how hollow the boy looked, both body and mind, his dark eyes barely focusing on me. Esme had turned him into a shell of himself. Not just Harry. Ariosa had lost that glow to her skin, and I was sure Wylan was going gray at 17. Even looking at myself in the mirror, I was constantly on edge, my cheeks starting to deflate. Turning back to the sea, I pressed my knees closer to my chest. The drilling was getting louder. It felt and sounded closer when I lowered my head, like if I turned at the right angle, I would hear it better. "You have a death wish, idiot?" Harry snorted, slumping down next to me and resting his chin on his knees. He reached into his shorts and pulled out a cigarette, lit it up, and took a long drag. The orange glow settled my dancing stomach. "I'm serious," he said, his lips curving around the cigarette. "We kill her and dump her body in the sea. Then run the fuck away. Problem solved?" "The problem is still there," I said pointedly. "You just declared war on a psychopath." I shoved him and he pulled a face, shoving me back. "Since when do you smoke?" Harry's gaze strayed to the ocean, smoke escaping his lips. "Since Ben." His words stung. "Well, what about Esme's dad?" I challenged him, changing the subject. I straightened up, stretching my legs. "We'll have to kill him too, right?" I could see him trying not to smile around the smoke. So I continued, eager to bring back the boy I grew up with. Even if it was just for one night. "Psycho sponge." He groaned. It was a good insult in my head. It was a terrible insult. "Did you see Wylan's face?" Harry laughed, and it was a good laugh, one that made me feel safe, despite knowing we were being watched. "We are going to leave here, don't worry." He shot me a grin. I told her to leave us alone, and Harry arched his neck, twisting around. "I think she got the memo?" "I hope she has anyway." Nodding along, I took in Harry's words, though they were fading in and out. I could hear that noise again. It was real, a loud drilling in the back of my head. Looking up at the sky, it was suddenly too black, like an endless oblivion that would never brighten. The sea lapping over my feet felt wrong somehow. Like it wasn't even wet. The sand bunched between my fists was too perfect. Perfect white sand filtering through my fingers. It was the kind of sand I dreamed of, unlike the actual beach, which was mostly pointed rocks and spiky shells. It was too perfect. I looked around, gulping down air. Ariosa and Wylan are trying to get the fire going, and Esme is handing out food. The perfect night. The stars twinkled above us. The perfect sky. "Harry." My voice sounded wrong, like the words on my lips weren't mine. He didn't look at me. "Yeah? How many times have we had this conversation? 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 How many times have we had this conversation?" Did I say that 5 times? 10? 15? 20? The moon flickered and went out completely. And I fell through the sand, dragged down. 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 The drilling was louder and closer. Real. I could feel it, a blade pulverizing through the back of my head, screeching blades dragging my thoughts to awareness. I could feel it seeping from me, blood dripping down my face and neck, pooling across the table I lay on. I opened my mouth to scream, but my lips were detached from me and my voice was no longer mine. Instead, my mind was suddenly in a permanent rewind. I was back on the beach, and this time Harry was smiling. His original words were torn away, that cutting blade slicing its way through my brain. "So here's what you're going to do?" His voice echoed, and he jumped up, picking Esme up and spinning her around. "You're going to stay with us. Forever. Never leave any of our sides. Asterisk, you're a leech. Asterisk. You're the most beautiful girl I've ever met. I want to be with you, Esme. Forever. I can't fucking take this anymore. She's going to kill me." This time I did scream, a raw cry ripping from my throat. I could sense a bright light behind my eyes. My wrists were strapped down and my head was pinned to a cruel, icy surface. Harry's voice continued, clanging in my skull. I love her, Thea. I love her so much it hurts. It was endless. It never stopped and my screams died out into whimpers. They didn't even bother sedating me again. I felt everything, every cut and slice, the warmth that glued my hair to my face and the saw that sheared all of it off. When the white light faded and flashing colors dotted my vision, I finally fell. Thea? When I opened my eyes, I was standing up. No longer on the beach, I stood barefoot in front of an indoor swimming pool lit up in pale blue light. I was so close to the edge, a white dress pooling at my feet, my hands wrapped around a bouquet of flowers. I found myself smiling. Even when I reached a trembling hand to my head where a veil had been forced into place, I stroked my fingers across my scalp where old stitches had come apart, seeping red, staining the collar of my dress and ruining my hair. When my fingers came back slick red, I swiftly wiped them on my dress, smiling wider. Roses. I clutched the bouquet tighter to my chest. They were Esme's favorites. Thea. Snap out of it. The man's voice startled me, reverberating through the room. I blinked, my vision swimming in and out of view. He was older than me, at least in his mid-20s, with thick, brown hair hanging in dark eyes that part of me recognized. The flower crown of white roses sitting on top of his head looked like a joke, a mockery of him. I didn't register the bloody strips of white wrapped around his head or the smear of red staining the front of his suit. Instead, I was choking on a name that shouldn't have matched the stranger's. No, not a stranger. Harry Sullivan was not 25 years old. Because if he was 25, then how old was I? I looked down at myself. I still felt 17, and yet I was taller, my dress perfectly fitting my figure. I was 17, but my body was older, so much maturer, molded, and perfected. No. I felt my legs give way, a cry rumbling in my throat. I was going to go to college. I was going to get away from her. How long had I truly been sitting on the beach on the last day of senior year? Thea, listen to me. His hands found mine, clammy and stained with blood, but his. It was him, and I wanted to cry. I wanted to ask how he had jumped forward in time when I already knew the truth. I was in denial, and denial was agony. I moved to wrap my arms around my friend, but he shook his head. No, don't move, he hissed out. If you move, she'll know something is up. Opening my mouth, my throat tasted of rusty change. How long? I wanted to scream, my chest was aching. Harry didn't speak. He didn't explain the strips of white wrapped around his head or the other's absence. He pressed something into my hand, delving it between the folds of my dress. The knife slid perfectly between my fingers, the blade pricking my skin. I didn't feel anything. Kill the bitch, he said through gritted teeth. Harry didn't cry. I don't think he could cry anymore. Do you hear me? He whispered, his voice collapsing into a sob. I wanted to know what had happened to him and what 8 years had done to my best friend. Fucking kill her, Thea. The doors flew open, the sound of heels clicking loudly on marble. Harry dropped to his knees, and I straightened up, fashioning my expression back to vacant. I wanted to help him. He couldn't stand up, his head was bowed. If I was going to kill her, though, I had to catch her off guard. Esme appeared, a blur of golden curls and fluffy pink. She was noticeably older, too. Esme's song was still beautiful, almost breathtakingly so. Her expression may have looked maturer, but that psychotic gleam was still there, twinkling in her eyes. Harry, her voice was more of a bird-like squawk. I stayed frozen, watching the girl march over to him, entangling her arms around him. You do realize it's bad luck for the groom to see his bride the night before. Harry didn't fight back when she pulled out a silk cloth, wrapping it around his eyes, her hand slipping over his mouth. Esme's lips found his ear, and I heard every word. This was the first time I'd heard her actually be scared. Since you're insistent on ruining our perfect day, I want to give you your wedding present early. Esme's voice was silky smooth and sultry. She held him like a toy, rocking him side to side. Harry didn't move, crumpling in her arms. His frenzied eyes found mine. Kill her. Come on, she crooned. Dad is waiting for you. I wanted to kill her right there before she could drag my friend away. But something snapped in my head and I was back on the beach. This time the tide was in and I was sitting alone. Behind me, Esme was the only one sitting by her fire. Thea, she shouted, waving at me to join her. The tide was at my feet, but I couldn't even feel it anymore. There were no stars. Thea, reality was being cruel to me. It wouldn't let me sleep. This time I awoke under a beautiful blue sky. Above me was a flower arch made of roses. Rows of strangers with wide smiles sit under trees entangled with lights. Standing on my left was Ariosa. Her red hair was piled on her head, perfectly fitted with a flower crown. Her smile was too wide, her intricately made-up eyes were half-lidded, and I was sure she had wet herself through her wedding dress. Ariosa wasn't really herself anymore, her gaze was penetrating right through me. I could see dark red smearing on the top of her head. Neither was Wylan, who was sculpted in a rich black suit. The boy was unrecognizable, hiding behind a mop of blonde curls and a nose job I knew he didn't need. Wylan had grown up, maturing into a handsome man. But once I was staring at him, I couldn't stop. I glimpsed telltale spots of blood staining his collar. His grin was dazed, drool seeping down his chin. Wylan was standing at an angle, swaying back and forth, and that glitter, which was my best friend, was gone. Thea. I blinked. Esme was inches away from me, the bride. Pay attention. I found myself nodding obediently. In a few simple words, she was going to become my wife. The knife was tucked into my dress. Harry was standing next to me. I didn't want to look at him because I knew what Esme's wedding gift was. In the corner of my eye, I glimpsed a thin line of black trickling down his temple, scarlet bandages hidden under that hideous, fucking flower crown. His eyes were lazily following a butterfly, and he could barely stand still. Harry was the one who tried to get away and clawed his way out of her control. Esme had decided to take his free will by force. The others spoke their vows like they had been cemented inside their minds. Harry Sullivan, Ariosa Carlyle, Wylan Sutton, Thea Littlewood. Take Esme Annalise Lockhart to be my wife, to have and to hold from this day forward. For better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until parted by death. Harry blinked, his lips forming a smile. I do. Ariosa giggled all the way through her speech, which was unintelligible. Wylan sealed his vow, grinning through a mouthful of scarlet. I think seeing him is what brought my thoughts to fruition. She had taken my friends, ripped away their youth, and now taken their minds. I think I said I do. The wedding party exploded into cheering, and we were showered in confetti. The officiator turned to me, and I saw bright, intense red. Fuck. I don't even remember moving. 1 second I was standing still, and the next I was straddling my new wife, stabbing her straight through the throat. I had to cut every order she had ever demanded of us directly from her mouth. Parted by death. The officiator's words were ringing in my skull. We were free. She cut into my head and turned me into the perfect wife. She turned my best friends into mindless shells. The wedding party was screaming, and so was I. Help! Blood was slick between my hands, but it felt good. I need help. There was no sign of my parents or anyone I knew. I didn't even see Esme's father. I kicked off my heels and ran, and luckily Ariosa thought it was a game, following me and grabbing Wylan. Knowing that I would regret it if I left him, I pulled a barely responsive Harry along too, who awkwardly stumbled after me. We made it out of the hotel grounds, and I called the police, who immediately sent us to urgent care. I spent 2 weeks in the emergency room, and I got 2 visitors. Emma from high school. She hugged me, and so did her 5-year-old girl. The second visitor was a surprise. Ben, Harry's old boyfriend, who was now a cop, had been tracking us down since our death when we were 17. Apparently, the Song family faked our deaths. Ben told me my parents left town a year after my death. He had contacted them multiple times but received no reply. They weren't interested, which was understandable. If someone told me my dead daughter was, in fact, alive and forced to marry her best friend, I wouldn't engage either. I asked Ben if he'd been to see Harry, and he nodded, his cheeks going pale. He told me the words I didn't want to hear. Harry wasn't Harry Sullivan anymore. The doctors explained it in more medical terms, a foreign object being obstructed through the skull and damaging the frontal lobe, or something like that. I wasn't really listening. Ben started talking about serious damage to the brain, and I was on my knees on cool tiles, choking up my lunch. I knew exactly what it was. Harry had been partially lobotomized in a desperate attempt to subjugate him. So, if my friends were lobotomized, what happened to me? I was drilled through the head. I got the same treatment. So, why was I awake and conscious and they were brain dead? I've been living with Ben for the last 2 years. Ari and Wylan have recovered in a way. I say it in a way because I'm lying to myself. They're completely different people. Wylan is erratic and acts like a child, and Ariosa repeatedly tells me how much she hates me. Their lack of emotion scares me. The doctors are puzzled. They didn't think it was possible to make as much progress as they have, but Jason Song was also using technology that they had never seen before. Ben argued that lobotomies don't control your mind, they destroy it. He was convinced something else was being used, which sent me to sleep for 7 years, forcing my body into autopilot. It would explain Wylan and Ari's behavior too. How they had somehow recovered or sort of recovered from a lobotomy. Harry spoke for the first time a few days ago. I have a habit of visiting him when Ben isn't guarding his bedside. I wasn't there when he spoke. I was buying soda when Ben stumbled out of the room vomiting everywhere. Unable to resist, I hurried inside. Harry was sitting up, propped up on pillows. His eyes were so much more alert, which gave me hope. Until he opened his mouth. Inclining his head, Harry frowned at me. Ariosa and Wylan have been looking behind me a lot. I thought they were staring into midair, but Harry was staring at the exact same spot. Just behind my right shoulder. He spoke her name with a glitter in his eye, and I think in his mind, Harry could still see her. And Esme was still the love of his and our lives. When I shut the door and sat down, his expression darkened. I hate that I can see so much of her in him. And it terrifies me. Harry was looking behind me, craning his neck. Where did my wife go? I told him she was dead, only for him to laugh. No, she's not, Harry said, like a child acting out. She was just right there. I know Esme can't be alive, but Ariosa and Wylan say the same thing. She's always standing right behind me.